and on. Up goes that. On goes that. And we start from there. Right, so it's the British Sub-Aqua Club Compressor Operations. Right? As I said, it's a little bit modified from the actual compressor operators course. Okay. Right, so I left the objectives in. The objectives are, at the end of this short lecture, you should be aware of the theory of gas compression, be aware of the design of gas compressors, understand air quality and how it is tested, and understand cylinder regulations and filling methods, and be familiar with compressor operation and cylinder filling. That's what we're aiming to do. All right, whoops, get out of it. So let's start off. Theory and design. Now that's a typical portable, electric driven, single stage, three stage gas compressor. When I say gas, I'm talking about any compressible gas, right, which will include air. Some of these compressors, or a bit later, but let's say when I talk about gas, I'm talking about air with regards to this lecture. Okay, so you must or all should be familiar with the gas laws. All right, there's 3 gas laws. There's one gas law that we all know. Anybody want to turk in on that one?
The Boyle's law.
Correct. Good. Right. So we know what Boyle's law says. Right. It says pressure is inversely proportional to volume at constant temperature, which easily said, you increase the pressure at constant temperature, you will decrease the volume. And it goes down at a set rate. Right? As the pressure rises, so the volume is decreased. The other one that comes along is Charles' law. Now, these are really to do with gas compression, right? All 3 of them come together, but like these are the extras you need to take into consideration when doing gas compression. Charles' law says volume is proportional to temperature at constant pressure. Now, what that's saying is that if you decrease the volume, right, you will increase the temperature, providing the pressure stays constant. All right. So if you've got a volume and you start to reduce that volume, you will increase the pressure of the gas. Volume meaning to compress that volume. All right, not just let it go. Right. You've got a fixed volume in there, and you're going to compress that and push it and make it smaller. You are going to get a rise in temperature. And the last one that is the Gay-Lussac's law, and that says pressure is proportional to temperature, providing the volume stays constant. Now, the reason you need those other 2 along with Boyle's law is because in compression and filling, both those other 2 laws come into play, right? Both those other 2 laws come into play. So you need to be able to understand what they are. Now, when it comes to actual filling, we use the universal gas law. And the universal gas law takes all the 3 components, pressure, volume, and temperature, and you get P1 V1 over T1 equals P2 V2 over T2. Don't get too bogged down in remembering that. This comes in when you are doing filling and working out temperatures and volumes and pressures between the tank you've got and the tank, what starts in the cylinder and what ends in the cylinder after you've been in the compressor. All right, it's more with advanced gas filling and the clever boys. But the trouble is, you don't really need to remember the universal gas law, because there's so many very, very good computer programs on the web that you can pick up or buy, which will actually do all the calculations for you, right? vPlanner is one of those programs, okay? And I believe that Sunto is also one of those programs, which will actually work out you tell it what you've got, and it will tell you what you need to add and what temperature and volume and pressures exactly you're going to get at the end of the day. So don't get yourselves bogged down on that. But remember, there are 3 basic laws wrapped together in the universal gas law that have an effect on the use of gas compressors. Right, so we talk about a single stage compression, all right? Single stage compression. That's one piston and pumping up the pressure from, let's say, 0 to whatever you want. Now, an easy identification of a single stage compressor is a bicycle pump, right? It's a single stage compressor. There's only one plunger, there's only one chamber, and you actually compress the gas in the bicycle pump, right? And you push it into the tire. And it's the physical act of pushing that air and reducing the volume in the shaft, in the cylinder of the pump, into the bicycle tire that raises the pressure in the tire. Now, thinking about a bicycle pump, what happens to a bicycle pump when you've used it for quite some time? It gets off.
Stiff, isn't it?
Right? It gets off. If you really go clappers on it, it gets off. All right. So that's a sort of example of a single stage compressor. Now, so you've got the chamber pressure and the chamber volume. Now, the perfect ideal on that, so it's where the piston starts and where the piston ends, right? And that's the volume of gas that you are going to compress. And the perfect, or the ideal, best gradient that you can have is that one there. Now, that one assumes that all the energy is contained and used to compress the gas. Right? No energy is lost. All the energy from the driver is used to compress the gas. So you don't lose anything at all. So that's the ideal case, which we know cannot work, right? Does not work in a commercial or that sort of the sort of compression that we want to talk about. There's 2 types of compression. There's adiabatic, right? Now, adiabatic is the sort of compression you get with a gas compressor, right? Single stage gas compressor will be adiabatic, right? It's uncooled. So what happens is that you start to push the air, the cylinder starts to move, it starts to push the air up inside the chamber pressure increases. When the pressure increases, right, we come into Charles' law, that's right, when the pressure increases, when the pressure increases, that's Boyle's law, the volume decreases, right, at constant temperature. But this won't ever be an actually constant temperature, right? Because there will be temperature, there will be the heat will rise. So what you've got at the start to what you've got at the bottom is going to be different. So the temperature isn't going to be constant. And so those other gas laws will play into that adiabatic cycle, right? And you can see the difference between the ideal and the adiabatic. That the area in the bit there is it's, sorry, I think that area is the energy used to compress that gas. Now, the other form of compression is isothermal, right? Which is cooled compression. So that means that you keep the gas temperature constant and you get straightforward Boyle's law, right? But it's isothermic. It doesn't suit a slow acting compressor, or sorry, a fast acting compressor. Isothermic takes time. So you've got isothermic and you've got adiabatic, right? Now, if we could actually, now, but you see that if I go back a little bit on there, first of all to that, if you could see the curve for the best possible and then add the curve for isothermic, it's a lot closer to the better compression, right? So we try to get isothermic, right? And we've tried to stick to an isothermic gradient. Doesn't always work because, as I said, all compressors really are adiabatic, right, in their action. So what we do is we bring in cylinders. So instead of having the compression as one push, right, one large cylinder pushing the gas up, we do the compression in stages. And what comes out then is we have, because that bit there, the shaded area, is all wasted energy, right? It's energy that we've actually wasted, which we don't want to waste. We want to try and get the compressor as efficient as we possibly can. So we use stage compression. So there's the two lines, adiabatic and isothermic. So we start our compression. Now, the first one we do is our first stage. Now, I've just flicked a little bit too fast on it. So on the first stage, we compress up on the first stage cylinder, and that follows the adiabatic line. But then we stop and we cool the gas that's being compressed down. And come that way, Robin, thank you. So as we cool it down, it comes back onto the isothermic line. We're in the second stage of compression. And so the second stage of compression also starts to take an adiabatic gradient, right? So when we've compressed it up in the second stage, we stop again. And we cool that air down again. And then we stick it into the third stage, which is there, and we take it up in the third stage to our final chamber pressure, right? And if you look at that now, that's all the energy that you've saved. So that's energy that's being used, it's less energy to drive the compressor, because if you've got a single stage compressor and you want to get quite a bit of pressure out of it, you can have a rather large driver, okay? Now, there's no stopping how many stages you use, right? There's nothing stopping how many stages you use, but 3 seems to be just right for diving compressors. To get us up to the pressure that we want, 3 is okay. We could have 4. Right? But remember, every time we go to a stage, we reduce the volume of the gas that we're compressing, because each stage is smaller than the stage before. And that's the only way it's going to work. Right? But in some very, very high pressure compressors, you may find 4, 5 stages of compression. And the final stage is the bore of the final stage is quite small. Right? But the pressure coming out of there is quite high. So that is basically what we're looking at with the diving compressor. So we go on to a multi-stage layout, all right? So that's a multi-stage compressor. So what do we look like when we're looking at a multi-stage compressor? Right, so on the multi-stage compressor, we have stage one, right? From stage one, it's made up with a inlet air compressor, inlet air filter, right? And the mesh of that air filter is very, very fine. The reason it's fine is because it's going to filter out any particulate matter, hopefully. Because the clearances in these pistons is quite important, right? You don't want to lose anything through the piston. Well, there's the cylinder, and what happens is we start the compression and push the cylinder in. Now, I know what you're going to say, but the air's going to come out the inlet. Well, of course it would do. You know, if you ain't got nothing there, it's going to come out the inlet. And so these compressor valve cylinders have what they call plate valves on them. Most have plate valves. They don't go for sophisticated. And all the plate valve is that when you go into the suction, right, and you pull the air in, right, the inlet valve opens, right? But the air that's already gone in front pushes the outlet valve closed, or the outlet plate closed, right? So therefore you fill up your cylinder with all your fresh charge, round it goes, and it starts to compress again. As soon as it starts to compress, the inlet plate valve shuts and the discharge plate valve opens, and you push the air into the next stage of the compressor. Now, we said we're going to put a cooler in between each stage, right? So therefore we have this little thing here, and you're going to do it, 1, 2, the LP intercooler. Now, these are all air cooled. Very, very few of these compressors use pump water or anything like that. They just use the flywheel to blow air across a finned cooler, which then takes the heat from the air and cools it down. Now, what happens to air when you cool it down? You've just heated it up with the compression, all right? Now you've cooled it down. What does air contain? And there's nothing you can do to stop it from containing it. What is air? What is in air? Moisture, right? Moisture. There might be other things in there, but predominantly it's water vapor, right? You'll come across the term called dew point, right? And if you, every sort of charge of it has its dew point. And if you take something above or below its dew point, then what happens is, above its dew point, what happens is the moisture comes out of solution, comes out of the air. And so it leaves the intercooler and goes into the condensate separator. And in there, it's like a filter. We'll cover that in a little bit later. And in there, the moisture and any other liquid impurities are filtered out. And we drain them through a drain valve, right? And you'll find out about the drain valve. It's a very important thing. And of course, the filter will have a relief valve on it to stop it from being overpressured. And in sophisticated compressors, you have a stage gauge to tell you what the pressure of that stage is. So that's your first stage, right? So that first stage is taken your air from atmospheric up to the pressure of the first stage, which is probably about 5 or 6 bar, right? Probably around about 5 or 6 bar. It's not very, very high on the first stage. Now we push the air into the second stage cylinder. And the second stage cylinder is on the crankshaft, exactly the same as the first stage. They're cycled in such a way so that they work correctly in sequence. And that's a smaller cylinder. All right, so that air now, as that second stage comes down, it allows that air that's in that between the first stage and the second stage to be drawn into the second stage compressor cylinder. And same thing again, you've got poppet valves or plate valves there, which stop the air from returning from the discharge side of the piston. And we start the whole sequence all over again, and we compress the air in the second stage. Now, again, as we said, what happens is you've got less volume, your temperature is still constant, and you're going to increase that pressure or reduce that volume, which would then increase the pressure. And then that gets pushed out again from the first, on the second stage discharge to the IP cooler. I've just jumped a little bit there. Just got the figure, let's take back. There we go. Yeah, to the IP cooler, and then through the next separator to the third stage, right? Exactly the same principle as before. It goes into the third stage, and in the third stage, it is ramped up or pressurized up to your final pressure. Now, when it gets to the end of the third stage, you've got, as it says there, an HP intercooler, right? And then you've got an aftercooler. Right? Again, this is all necessary to make sure that that air comes out at the right condition for you to put into your cylinder. Right? So first of all, you cool it, you take any liquid out in the cooling, you cool it again and take even more liquid out in the on the other side of the aftercooler in the last of the final separation. There's a check valve in there to stop anything from coming back. Now, the reason you got a check valve in there because you're going to connect cylinders up. Now, your cylinder may have a higher pressure than the compressor when it starts. So you don't want that cylinder pressure coming back along the line. So you want to get the compressor running until it reaches a pressure where it can actually overcome the outlet pressure and then feed into the bottle. So all in all, we finish off with a non-return valve, right, which means it only goes in one direction, can't go in the other, and an outlet pressure gauge, which is the one we use to see what we've got in our cylinder. And from there, we go through another filter tower and then to the filling manifold. Right. And again, there is a relief valve there on the end, which protects the whole system against overpressure. And that basically is the layout for most diving compressors. All right. Questions? You all got that?
Yeah.
My God, that's intelligence for you.
What's the aftercooler? Why does it need the second stage of cooling after the third stage?
What do you mean? The
So,
aftercooler, you got.
Yeah, we go
an
to the high pressure intercooler, take the moisture out, and then cool it again.
Yeah, because I was on about dew point.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too complicated. If you take a gas down below its dew point, you've got more or less dry gas. Right? There's no moisture. The moisture is in the gas. But if it's allowed to come above its dew point, and that, again, it goes on pressure and temperature. But if you allow the gas to come above its dew point, then any moisture that's in the air will come out. Right? So you try to condition gas to make sure that it's got a very low dew point and you've taken out as much of the liquid as you possibly can get out of it. So it's just really a case of filtration. Right? You want to try and make sure that none of the air that gets into your cylinder is wet, oily, or contains any other toxins that might be harmful for you to breathe. And that's why you're putting in lots of filtration or that final filter tower, all right, to ensure that you are separating as much of the or conditioning the air as best you possibly can, so that the air you breathe is okay. We'll go a little bit more into air quality when we get to the other end, okay? But basically, that is how a compressor works, right? So we just compress the gas over a number of stages, and in each stage, we take the gas up, pressure up in stages, right? By reducing the size of the cylinder, and at the end of the day, what you're pushing out on the third stage, volume-wise, is very small. But when it gets into the cylinder, it will pressurize up the cylinder until the cylinder is the same pressure as the discharge from the third stage. And that's what you're aiming to do. And that's why it takes some while for you to use a compressor to charge a cylinder. Right? Again, we'll talk a little bit more about filling when we get to the other end, because there's various ways of making filling quicker and more efficient. But there's a little bit more costly because you have to put a system in that allows you to do that. And all we're saying now is that I put air atmospheric in at one end, and over 3 stages of compression, I get air that's been conditioned and cleaned and filtered going into my cylinder at the final pressure I want it. And these compressors operate at around about anywhere between 230 and 300 bar. But the higher the pressure, the longer it takes to fill a cylinder with a small compressor. All okay on that? Ask any question you like, because let's use the time constructively. Mickey? Okay.
No, good.
Yeah. Right. All right. So let's move on. Oh, what happened there? That's a pressure maintaining valve. So moving on. So let's have a look at the design. Right. The lubrication. Right? These compressors have to be lubricated. No way about it. They have to be lubricated. But the thing that we don't want in our system is what?
Oil.
Lubrication.
Water.
That's right. Oil. For many reasons, we don't want oil in our system. And so we try to keep as much as we can, the oil and the air separated. And that's why the cylinders are made the way they are. And the oil is basically to lubricate the moving parts in the crankshaft. Right? We don't normally, we won't put oil in the cylinders themselves. Right? The cylinder rings are designed, and the cylinder rings are self-lubricating. So we don't get oil up there. But of course, we could get oil past there if the rings are wearing, and we'll soon know about that. Right? But that's one of the reasons we got all this filtration. Is if there is any oil passing over, small amounts of it, it's taken out in that filtration and in those separators. So we've got to lubricate the oil. The other thing about compressors is most compressors use a non-carbon based oil, a synthetic oil, right? So we're not going to introduce a carbon based oil into our air system. They're synthetic oils. The prime movers, as we said, now the prime movers can be all sorts of things, but basically the prime movers are small compressors, little petrol engines, or single phase motors. On a larger compressor, you might get a 3-phase motor and a larger engine. And on the big ones, you will have a 3-phase motor. They tend to, the industrial ones tend to be 3-phase motors, right? Which then does away with all the aggravation of exhaust and engine leaks. Right. So if you've got a three phase, if you've got an electric motor, you can more or less have the whole lot running without any worry of contamination to the air that you're sucking in. If you've got a petrol motor or an internal combustion motor that's driving it, you've got to make sure the exhaust is well away from the inlet, somewhere in the region of about 2 or 3 meters, socially distanced, of course. Right, so you've got one big pole that takes in your air and it sucks the air from a high point, and you try never to locate the compressor with the exhaust, right, upwind of the inlet. Turn it around the other way. So if any wind is blowing, it's going to blow the exhaust away from where you're sucking in the air. All right. So they're the prime movers that you'll use. Petrol, small petrol engines like a Honda, single phase or 3-phase electric motors. You get oil-free compressors. Oil-free compressors are basically for the use in compressing oxygen. And they do compress oxygen, but it's not the sort of thing you would do in a normal diving environment, right? But you can get compressors that will handle nitrox, compressed nitrox. You mix it up, put it in, boom, away it goes, right? But the thing about using oil-free compressors is the fact you then do not get any risk of oil contamination. Because what happens when you get oil and oxygen together?
Fire.
Huh?
You get a fire.
Well, you get, yes, you could get a few other things and all, believe it or not. But no, you're right. If oil and oxygen together become very combustible. And you've got heat there as well anyhow in the compression cycle. So oil-free compressors are if you're going to be compressing high mixes of oxygen and nitrogen, i.e. nitrox. Right, so that did finish the theory of compression. So hopefully we understand what we're dealing with a compressor. Basically, it's a very, very simple idea, all right? And we'll do a little bit later in the course on how to operate one of these compressors. Right, so now we've compressed our air, right? What else do we want to know about the air that we're breathing?
Oxygen content.
Yeah, we want to see how pure that air is, right? So this part of the course, we're going to talk about gas filters, the design and the criteria, the sort of chemicals we're going to use in the filters, and how long the filters are going to last. Then we're going to look at air purity standards, right? And then we're going to do a bit of, just very, very briefly, touch on gas testing. Right, so let's have a look first of all, the design criteria. Right, these filters are designed to do what? They're designed to remove, but what are they going to remove out of that air?
Particulates.
Go on.
Particulates.
Yeah, go on, yeah. Anything else?
Some oil. Water.
Yeah, go on.
Water.
Ah, great. Right. Why do we not want water, right? Water vapor, oil mist, and odor. Why don't we want water vapor in the air we breathe?
Wouldn't it give you pneumonia?
Well, I suppose you would if there was enough of it in there, but just moisture in the air. Why won't we want that in our cylinder?
Be rusting and corroding the cylinders.
That's right. Good. Internal corrosion. internal corrosion. That's the main reason. But remember, you're going to pump that cylinder up to 200 bar. Then you're going to drop that pressure down to maybe 50 bar, right? So again, thinking of the gas laws, right, and the dew point, if you've got moisture in that air and that air isn't dry, any moisture that's in the air is going to come out of its suspension, and it's going to condense out in your cylinder, right? And what is the worst thing that can happen is you've got oxygen in there, right? You've got 21% oxygen in there, and you get water. So you get oxygenation. I think they call it, is it oxidizing, right? So you'll get corrosion inside the cylinder. It's got a perfect place for it. And that's why they look at your cylinder to make sure that you haven't had moisture or water in that cylinder, because it's got the ideal conditions to cause corrosion. Every time you pump that cylinder up, you make that cylinder warm, right? Then you go and jump in the cold water, you make that cylinder cold. So any moisture that's in there, if the air's not dry and been completely treated the way it should do, will come out of solution. Oil mist, as I said, you can get oil carryover in the air. You don't want any oil in there, mainly because it tastes horrible. You know, it tastes horrible, and you'll taste it. Luckily, as I say, thank God, I've never ever had a bad fill. But that's the reason. So we want to make sure we take any oil out of it. And of course, the other reason is if we got oil in the air, and we're, say, doing a nitrox mix using partial pressure blending, the first thing we put in our cylinder, right, is oxygen. And if we've got oil, just a coating of oil on the inside of that cylinder, when we put neat oxygen into that cylinder, at whatever pressure we put it in at, we've got a perfect area for it to go pop, right? So again, that's one of the reasons we make sure we don't have any oil. And odor, we don't want smelly air. So we get that. But there's another thing that most compressors nowadays have fitted onto them, is the ability to take out one other gas.
Carbon dioxide?
Carbon monoxide.
Carbon monoxide.
Because what does carbon monoxide do to our blood?
It's poisonous.
Huh?
Poisonous.
Yeah.
It steals the oxygen.
That's right. Yeah, because it's 20 times more. It's 20 times more attracted to hemoglobin than oxygen. So it'll attach itself to the hemoglobin easier than the oxygen. And in the end, there's no room for the oxygen to get carried around the blood, right? So we mustn't have any of that nasty shit in there. Particulate matter is the other one as well, right? We don't want any small particles going into the system and into our bodies. And again, can include additional design features for carbon monoxide removal. Because you won't know if there's carbon monoxide in there, will you?
No.
Right? Not until you go, and somebody's got to bring you to the surface doing a CBL. Now, that's the first time you'll know if you've got carbon monoxide poisoning. And by then it's too late, right? So we're very, 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 very critical on our air filtration. So we use chemicals in the air, in the filters, to make sure they meet the standard we want. So what's a filter? A filter goes in and the air comes out. So it goes in one part, goes up through the filter tower and comes out of the other part. And over that filter tower, there's layers of different chemicals and structures that will help to filter the air to a standard that is suitable for diving. Right? So normally the first thing that goes in there is activated alumina. Right. We all know what activated alumina is, don't we?
No.
Oh shit! I didn't tell you. Oh dear. Activated alumina. That means I got to go to my bloody notes now. Thank you very much, Jen. That's all right.
I'm assuming it's aluminium.
Yeah, it's yeah, but it doesn't matter. I do know. Activated alumina is it will take out the moisture, but it will also take out other things as well, right? So it's the first place it goes to. It goes through the activated alumina, and it will filter any moisture out of the air and particulate matter as well, right? Then it goes up through a pad. So there's a pad. The first layer is activated alumina, followed by another pad, followed by activated charcoal. Right? Activated charcoal takes out the vapors and a few other things, right? So that's the up to now we've got one set of moisture removal. Then we go to a pad. Then we go to taking out impurities such as the takes a bit of oil out, and it also takes out some particulate matter. And then we go up a bit further through another pad, and we come up to the molecular sieve. Now, molecular sieve, again, is good for removing moisture. So, as you said, we don't want, one of the main things we don't want in our air is we don't want water, right? We don't want water vapor at all. And so we put it through two sets of water chemicals that will remove the moisture from the air. And then it goes out through another pad, and from the other pad, it will go out, go back a bit, yeah, through the other pad, it goes out to the charging panel. Now, that is the filter tower that's on the end of the, after we've done all the compression, that's the filter tower that will sit right on the end. There might be one, there might be two of these, it all depends. All right, so moving on, these are disposable filters, they're filter cartridges, right? Some of them you can replace, most of them you just take them out, buy a new one, put it in. Very, very few of them are able to be recycled. So let's have a look at a disposable filter cartridge. Again, we've got silica gel or alumina, activated alumina. We've got carbon, we've got foam pads, molecular sieve, right? And it's the molecular sieve that's got a 4 micron size pore size, all right? So it's taken out everything less than 4 microns. And 4 microns is quite small, right? So it's going to make sure that there's no carryover. See, there could be carryover from the, if the carbon starts to break down, that could carry over, and we don't want that going into the cylinder either. So that molecular sieve is like the last bit that does a 4 micron trapping of any particulate matter, as well as doing a little bit on the moisture side. Right? It's got there, it's crystalline soda, activated charcoal, or sodium silicate and aluminium oxide. These are the sort of chemicals that they're putting into these filters to make sure that at the end of the day, the air you breathe meets the standard that is required by health and safety and the British standards. Right, so what does it do? Right, silica gel, as we said, takes out the moisture. Alumina does exactly the same. The odor and oil is taken out predominantly by the carbon filters, activated charcoal. The molecular sieve, again, does moisture and oil, and some particulate matter, right? Only stuff less than 4 microns will get through that pore, that section of the filter. And that's what they remove. Now, the life of a filter, right? What determines how long that filter lasts is normally the filter capacity. That is, again, a large filter is going to last longer than a small filter. Changing the filter, right? And to change the filter, we normally change the filter on accumulated hours run. And the filter supplier will tell you it will give you the formula for how long you can use that that cartridge for. All right. Some of them are fitted with moisture sensors. All right. So if the moisture sensor shows that the filter is not taking out the moisture to the required degree, then you've got to change that filter. Right, so they're the reasons. So it's hours run, and if you've got a moisture filter sensor on there, it might be when the filter is unable to keep the moisture requirements or the standard in line with what's required. Right? Normally, they will be something like 15 to 20 hours of running. Depends how you run it, right? And depends how you leave it after you shut down. But normally you'd probably be looking at, if it's 20 hours, you'll probably get 20 hours. You might get 40 fills out of one filter, 12-litre cylinder. Because it also depends on how long, how many cylinders you're filling and how long you're filling. So if you're not filling from zero every time, let's say you bring your one back and you've got your own compressor and you've got 100 bar left in, you're only putting 100 bar in there. So you're going to be able to fill that cylinder a lot quicker than if you're taking it right the way down to, let's say, 50 bar, 30 bar. So we have a set of purity standards. Now, this is not so much aimed at the private air compressor that some divers have, right? This is aimed at commercial or club compressors. And there is a standard that you must maintain. And if you've got a club compressor or you've got a commercial compressor, you are compelled by law to fill in a test sheet we did ours every month. Yeah, we did ours every month. But some say maybe 3 months, 4 months, right? But you have to fill it in and you have to do a air purity test on your compressor, which means you're going to fill a cylinder up and then test the air in that cylinder. You're not actually going to test it on the compressor. You're going to fill a cylinder and then you're going to carry the test out on that cylinder. Okay? Or you can take a sample of your air compressor and you can send it off to a lab and the lab will do the air purity test for you. Then they'll send you back a certificate to say you have met the standard or you haven't met the standard. Right? A lot of commercial companies send it away and have a test done that way because it saves time and it also saves money. So the standards, right, so we said, what we want to know is the components that we've got in the air, the main components. So oxygen, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, oil, water, solid particles, odor, taste. Now that's a typical test sheet, all right? And we've got the gas that we're using, air. So we've got to have oxygen in air has got to be 21 plus or minus 1%. So 1% of 21, don't ask me, I'm not going to do calculations. It ain't a lot, right? It ain't a lot. So it's got to be 1% either way, up or down. Carbon dioxide, less than 500 parts per million. That's quite small, all right? Quite small, but that's what you've got to have. Less than 500 parts per million. Carbon monoxide, less than 15 parts per million. So they'll take that sample, they'll draw a sample off, and they'll test that sample for carbon monoxide. And it has to have less than 15 parts per million in that sample. Oil, below 0.5 milligrams per meter cubed. Water, less than 25 milligrams per meter cubed. Solid particulates, no residue, none allowed. Odour, none. So it mustn't stink. So don't go spraying brute in there. That's not going to work, right? Okay. It might be the nice big strong smell of brute, but don't go. So that's for air. For clean air, they say, what the hell's clean air? Well, we're going to come on to that now. Right, so clean air, we've got to be 21 plus or minus 0.5%. Our carbon dioxide has gone down to 400 parts per million. Our carbon monoxide is now 3 parts per million. Our oil has gone down to 0.01, and our water is less than 5. We don't worry about solid particles. Methane is also included in there, less than 30, and other hydrocarbons, less than 50. Right, so throw this one at you, boys. What do you know by the term clean air?
It's a medical grade, is it?
Huh?
Medical grade air?
No, it's not medical grade air. It's air that is going to be used to make nitrox.
Oh.
Yeah.
Partial blending, right? I had my wrist slapped many years ago by a senior diver when I took his nitrox tank and I connected it to the filling bottles of the main filling system, not the clean air. And he went absolutely loopy with me. So, yes, if you've got oxygen clean cylinders, right, that have been oxygen cleaned and stamped and labelled as oxygen clean, all air should be clean air, right? But there is a difference, you know, and some filling stations keep a difference between air and clean air. And if you say, right, I want clean air, you may pay a little bit more for that clean air. Why am I paying a little bit more for that clean air? Because it's filtered, right? So you not only do you go to that last filter chamber, you go one more filter after that, which is very, very fine. And that takes out all the remaining crap that you might have allowed to go in on normal air is taken out at that point. Your air is a lot less likely to contain any moisture that's going to cause a problem. Now, the reason for that is, as I said, we're using these tanks for nitrox. So we're using the tanks for a high mix of oxygen, anything up to 100%. Now, if you've got moisture in the air and you put 100% oxygen and that tank has got moisture in it, and then you leave it for a little while, that is a perfect ground for oxidization. And you're going to get oxygen corrosion on the inside of that tank. Quite rapid as well. Quite rapid. All right. So that's one of the reasons. that we have clean air. And so when somebody says, oh, do you want clean air? I'll just shove it on there. No, you say, no, I've got this tank, it's oxygen cleaned, and I want oxygen. So you can go to places like Portland, right, to the big shop there, DIR, Underwater Explorers, at the end of Portland Causeway, and they've got a massive, great big filling complex there where you can take your cylinder in and they'll fill from a compressor any type of mix you want. Nitrox, helium, the lot, right? And so what you don't want is, or what they don't want is, they don't want to be putting that stuff into a tank, into a cylinder that hasn't been oxygen cleaned, right? Not so much worried from 40 down, that's not too much of a problem. When you go above 40, like 45, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100% mixes of oxygen, then it becomes very, very critical. Right? The same reason that the hydrocarbons are so low. You don't want any oil at all in that cylinder, so that when you start poking high pressure oxygen into the cylinder, you don't get a quick bang. So that's what you're looking for, right? As I said, this is mainly done commercially, though some people do carry out their own tests. How do I carry these tests out? Whoops, nitrox cylinder, clean air only, all right? It's just backing up what I've said. So gas testing, how do I do a gas test, right? The test methods. The very simple test method is using a Draeger, right? Take a Draeger tube out, break the end, put it in the meter, take a sample, look at the sample. If it meets that standard, I fill it in, and that's it. The thing about commercial or club compressors is that your air purity records have to be kept. And at any time, somebody can come in from the HSE and look at your air purity records. And if you haven't got none, they're going to come down on you like a ton of shit. They really will, right? So you must keep the records. So that's one way. It's not cheap. You know, it's a very easy way of doing your tests, but those Draeger tubes are once only use and they're not cheap. Or you can go a little bit up market and buy a kit for testing. Again, it's more expensive, but it's there and it's easier to use. But again, if you're a commercial outfit, that will have to be assessed every year and signed off as being checked, right? Because it becomes a legal piece of kit. The easy way, as I said, is some of them just take a sample bottle, send a sample bottle off to a laboratory, the laboratory do the test, sends you back another sample bottle for your next one, and a record of what the test came back as. It costs a little bit, but it's a damn sight easier than going through the rigmarole all yourself. But that's it, right? So they're the test methods that there are. Test requirements. Wing. Oh, sorry, test requirements. I believe, coming back on that, I believe they're either every 6 months for a commercial compressor or every 3 months, something like that. But there is a time limit or a time requirement when you must start to have your air test, and you've got to keep that record. But you also keep a record of all your fills and how long the compressor's been running, right? And some of these compressors have quite sophisticated instrumentation on them. So now let's have a look at gas filling, right? How are we doing? We're not doing too bad. Tell me when you're bored. You all right? Not going to sleep?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right, good. There we go. Outline. Right, so look at cylinder standards. Manufacturers, including cylinder markings and colour codings. I'm not going to go too much into this because most of you people understand it anyhow. cylinder testing and labeling, and then filling. And from a compressor and from an air storage cylinder. Right, so this is the last part. Here we go. Straight in on that, and a bit of safety and maintenance. Standards and markings, right? So this is up to date. Okay, your cylinder should have any one of those stamped on it. An EN standard, a British standard, right? EN standard, of course, is the European standard. BS, of course, is British standard. And the other two are probably American. One for aluminiums, one for steels, right? Now, they should all have a marking on them that corresponds to that. Older standards are still valid. So if you've got one that hasn't got that, you have to go online and check your standard is still valid, right? Just check your standard is still valid. But there are lots of cylinders still kicking around that are old standard. And they're still perfectly okay. It should have a CE marking, right? What is CE? Anybody want to enlighten me? Something European, and it's certificate European or something like that?
Something like that. We don't have to bother with it soon.
There must be a Brexiteer there. Right, so let's look at the shoulder markings. I'm not going to do all the work here. Right, let's have that first one then. Okay, you have a go, Mickey. What's that first one?
That's the standard.
It was easy, wasn't it, eh? Right, John, what's the 12L?
12 litre.
Well done. Richard, WP.
Is that working pressure?
Oh, well done. That could also be, I think some of them actually has CP on as well. Working pressure, or, yeah, some of them have CP, which is charge pressure. So, you know, be aware that you could get CP there. Doesn't mean anything. It just means that's charge pressure, which is equal to working pressure anyhow. Okay. And the next one, TP, I'm going to do, which is test pressure. And then the last bit is the manufacturing date. 3 is the month, the 01 or whatever is the year, right? And they're most important, right? They're most important that they are on that cylinder. There'd be a lot of other bits and pieces like the serial numbers, etc., but they're the most important part of it, right? Working pressure, that's the limit that you can charge that cylinder to, right? And the test pressure, you should never go anywhere near, right? You do see some people charging aluminium cylinders to 230 bar. Now, they're naughty people, right? Because you think, oh, well, shit, it ain't going to make that much difference. But you are actually putting stress on the threads of the valve that goes in the top of that cylinder. And if you do it enough times, you will actually elongate the slots in the valve. And then when you put it in there, it won't pass the no-go gauge test. So they're your shoulder markings, right? They won't detract too much. And you also get a contents label. So you might have a label like that, nitrox, right? Which will also be on the cylinder to tell you that that cylinder is able to receive nitrox. And then you've got shoulder markings, right? And the shoulder marking, regardless of what colour the cylinder is, should be black and white quarters, okay? The rest of the cylinder can be any colour, but that's what you should normally find. But nowadays you'll see people kicking around, and even me, if I look at my cylinders, I ain't got black and white collars. They're all white cylinders, but all the rest of the required bits and pieces are there. But that's what you might see on the contents label or the cylinder. But the shoulder markings, they definitely must have something like that on the shoulder marking to show that the cylinder is legal. Right, testing. Come on in. How often do we test a cylinder?
Every 2.5 years.
Yeah. Right, good, good. Anyone want to elongate on that?
Is there, you test it visually every 2.5 years, and then the next test is a hydrostatic test.
Thank you very much, Richard. That is spot on. Spot on.
Isn't it
Yeah.
something as well, like if you buy a brand new tank, you don't have to test it for something like 3 years or something like that?
Crap. No. You buy a brand new cylinder,
Yeah,
you still got to do a 2.5 year visual test. You don't get any buy-in time.
yeah,
You don't get any buy-in time at all. It just means that your first test is 2.5 years after you bought it. And your next test is 5 years.
yeah.
Right? So it's visual. It's every 5 years, it has to be hydrostatically tested. And every 2.5 years, it needs to be inspected internally just to make sure there's no damage internally or externally for that matter, right? Now, they were talking about doing it every year. Naughty, right? Oxygen or cylinders that are used for nitrox or to accommodate 100% also have to be inspected and cleaned every 18 months. It becomes quite an expensive game, believe me. So anyhow, let's go back onto the thingy. Tested standard, right? Steel will be, the test standard is EN 1968. You could call these up and see what you need to see on them. It's entirely up to you. Aluminium is EN 1802. You know, you could be a smarty pantsy and you could go to your filling station and say, excuse me, what is your steel test standard? And then if he says to you, get lost, you know, well, he doesn't know what he should. No, you can ask them, do you test to EN 1968? But if they're a registered filling station, they will do. So there's the two test standards, all right? And the test frequency is every 30 months, which is 2.5 years and then 5 years. So on regular bit, what you say is 2.5 years, I do a visual, 5 years, I do a static. So let's say I bought my cylinder at the end of the year, right? Well, no, I bought my cylinder and it was marked 0120, right? When would I need to have that cylinder inspected on the first run?
0622.
Huh?
You go, Nicky.
I bought it in 20, so it's 0120.
June 22.
22, what month?
6. 7.
That's right. Right? 2.5 years, 30 months after I bought it. And it's at the end of that month. So it would need to be tested at the end of June 2022. That's 2.5 years. Okay. The next one after that would correspond to the 5 years, and that would be a hydrostatic. Right. So if you kept your tanks in good order, then there is no way that people can say, oh, you've had that tank 10 years. So what? It's been tested. It's still in test, which means it's still in perfectly good condition. So I'm not going to do a lot of cut down on price just to keep you happy. Right. If you've got a tank and it's still in good nick and it's still in test and can be tested again, then it hasn't lost its value. So, you know, don't let people say, well, you've had it 5 years, you've got to give it to me. No, piss off, go and buy one. If I'm asking for 100 quid, if you want to go and buy one, you're going to pay 200 quid for that cylinder, you know. And there's nothing wrong with my cylinder, and you're getting it for £100 cheaper. Think about it. So test frequency, 30 months. Now, cylinder markings. I'll give you my knowledge on this one, which isn't good. Yeah, you will see that marking stamped on the neck of the cylinder every time it goes through a visual or a hydrostatic. Now, not quite true now, right? It may not be stamped on a visual. What happens now is you look at the next one down, which is the little blue label, right, in IDEST label, okay? Now, what happens, especially at Stony Cove, if they can't see that IDEST label, they will not fill the cylinder, regardless of the fact you've got it stamped. They told me that themselves, right? So you have to make sure that that doesn't get damaged. All right, so because that's the ID of when that tank, that cylinder is next required to be tested and what test it will need. Now, the reason for that is because people keep their cylinders for a long time. In the end, they run out of space to keep putting these bloody stamps on. And so what they're saying is that they may not stamp on a visual. They have to stamp on a hydrostatic, but they may not stamp on a visual. But they'll tell you that. And now you'll also get a different colour for a visual. When you put your tank in to have it, cylinder in to have it visualed, it will come back with a nice green sticker on it, not a blue one. And that is because it's easy recognition to say this one has been visualed, and the next one, the next time it comes in for test, will have to be a hydrostatic. It's just the way that they do it. So just beware. So
Robin, looking at that label.
Yeah.
So the next one after that would be visual, looking at that label. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I can't see,
If you're going by that colour coding.
January, February, March on that side, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's March in 09.
Yeah.
09, right? So it's due March 09, yeah. Now, where do you see the visual?
Yeah, how do you know looking at that label?
There's another little bit which will have either visual or hydro, right? And that'll also be stamped out as well. Next time we go diving, I'll show you, because it's on all of my cylinders, right? So you'll either get it off of that, a stamp on the cylinder, or you'll get it off of a label stuck on the cylinder, okay? Now all that label should be on the neck of the cylinder in exactly the same way, because it's made that way. So it shouldn't be stuck halfway down the bloody cylinder, right? And if they do and they say it don't matter, you can just say to them, well, it may not matter to you, but it matters a bloody lot to me. Can you get it and put it on properly? Right. So cylinder markings, the end of the month, right? So the end of the month on this one, we're looking at the end of March in the year of 09, that cylinder needs to be either visualed or hydroed. Okay. Now, what do you know about eddy current? Apart from he's a nice bloke. No, aluminium cylinders. Right? Eddy currents are used on aluminium cylinders, and they're used to ensure that the neck has no cracks in it. Right? Aluminium cylinders do tend to have, or the early ones did tend to have hairline cracks appear in the neck, right? In the neck threads of the cylinder. And the only way to find out if they're there, because they are hairline, is they do an eddy current test on it, right? So on certain aluminium cylinders, you may have to have an eddy current test as well, right? But that's what an eddy current test is all about. It isn't on a steel cylinder, it's on an aluminium cylinder. Right. Oh, any other questions on that, gentlemen? No?
Good.
You're all right on it? Excellent.
Yeah.
Right. We're coming in on the final now. Right. Compressing procedure. Pre-operational checks. Check the cylinder. Make sure it's in date. Set up the portable compressor. Consumable checks. Are the filters okay? right? Everything else there. Manufacturer's checks, read the manufacturer's literature and open all the drain valves. Start to fill, check the prime mover, start the prime mover, plug it in or start the motor running. Begin compressing. Connect the cylinder and start filling. Drain condensates from all of the separators on a regular basis. When you get to the end, remove the cylinder when it gets to pressure. And shut down. Just move this out of the way. It's in my way. Get out of it. In shutdown, release the pressure, stop the compressor, drain valves all open, close all the drain valves, sorry, and fill in the compressor log. So you drain all the air out of the compressor and then close all the drain valves. That stops any air being sucked back into the compressor. Right. Fill in pre-operational. Check cylinder. In test, correct labels, valid standard, general condition, oxygen service, working pressure, right? Just check those. Now, as a compressor operator, which you're not at the moment, but if you were a compressor operator, I just say to you, if you don't like the look of that cylinder, don't fill it. Don't fill it, right? If it's not in date, don't have any bullshit. No, you're not going to fill. And that's a club compressor as well. Somebody brings in a cylinder, say, oh, fill that for me. And you check it and say, it's not in date. It hasn't got valid standards. I'm not going to do it. But it's risky to you to even think about doing it. And if it looks tatty, it could be tatty, right? And if it's going to be for oxygen service and you can't do oxygen clean air fills, don't fill it. Decline to fill if in doubt. Exactly what I just said. Right. Set up portable compressor, exhaust downwind intake 2 meters high, secure noise. You know, make sure that you've got earmuffs on if you're going to stand alongside it. Consumable, filter life, fuel if petrol, diesel, condensate levels. Right. These are the consumable checks. Refer to compressor log for filter life. So you enter when you change the filter, and then as soon as you get rid of that filter and put a new one on, you enter that in the log as well, right? So you keep a check of when you do filters. Manufacturer's checks, that's guards, oil level, coolant, etc. All depends on the type of compressor you're using. Refer to the manual or local operating instructions, blah, blah. Open all drain valves, right? That's pre-operational. Never start a compressor under load. You won't be able to start a little 5.5 Honda compressor if you haven't drained all the air out of the system, because it won't let you go. You will never get it actually running round. The compressor will stop it from actually getting enough motion to kick off. So that's just a thing. Right, fill in, start and fill. So start the prime mover. So it says don PPE if using electric, close isolator, press switch, fuel pound, turn the fuel on. PPE would just mean goggles, a mask, protective eyewear, and gloves and earmuffs, right? And then you just follow the start procedure for the prime mover. You begin compressing. Close compressor drains, watch the outlet pressure rise. That's what happens. Connect the cylinder, right, to the charging hose, open cylinder valve, and you observe the pressure open the charging valve, right? So once you start there, you'll see the pressure start to go up. Keep cylinders cool. Oh, I'm going to have to go with this, but I don't believe it. What we used to do, we used to stick them in a bath of water, right? But in actual fact, it didn't do nothing. Now, this was to try and keep a constant temperature, all right? Yeah, you can, if you're doing a lot of cylinders, you might put them in a tank and then do them one at a time while they're sat in the tank, just to keep the cylinder. The cylinders do tend to get warm, but they don't tend to get that warm, right? Again, it all depends how you do it. It's really so you don't have to keep doing another top-up fill after you've finished, because when the cylinders start to cool down, the volume, the pressure will drop, part of the gas laws. And drain condensate, normally if you're running a small portable compressor, you just crack the drain valves about once every 10 minutes and drain off until there's no more moisture coming out, right? And you'll see a change in the sound of the compressor. And every 10 minutes, oh, look at that, eh? Pretty good, wasn't I? Yeah. Must have read this one before. And remove the
Sorry,
cylinder.
Robin, how come you can't just leave the condensate valves open so it just pisses out all the time whilst you're filling?
What's that?
The system will lose pressure.
Why can't you leave the condensate valves
No,
open?
because no, and I'll tell you why. Because let's say the compressor is rated to fill a cylinder in 40 minutes, let's say, right?
Yeah.
You leave one of those drain valves open and you won't fill it. It'll get to a certain pressure, and depending on which drain valve you've left open, you won't, it just won't, the pressure won't go up. Right? You just quickly open it, and most of them are spring loaded. So you open it, and as soon as you let it go, it closes.
Yeah.
What you drop, all you're doing, Richard, is you're blowing out any moisture from that separator. And all the separator is like the air comes in one way and then it goes up over a tortuous path, and any moisture gets knocked out that way. It sits in the bottom of the separator, and you just blow that out to make sure that you don't, because as the water goes up, and it will go up, then you're losing, you've got more risk of liquid carryover between cylinders, and you don't want that. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Right. But you won't fill the cylinder. That's all I'm saying. At the end of the day, it will take forever. And I know, because I've done it. So, I'm talking from experience. Yeah. Close the cylinder valve, close the charging valve, vent pressure, disconnect the cylinder. And again, you'll see how they work. It doesn't take long for people of your ilk to pick up filling cylinders on a compressor, right? You're all clever enough to do it. If an idiot like me can do it, you can do it. Don't answer that, please. If you don't do it in a certain sequence, or if you're too slow, you may get this horrible whoosh, which will scare the living shit out of you. But don't worry about it. What's happened is the compressor is protecting itself because the relief valve is lifted. And it's quite frightening, especially on a big complex where you've got a lot of banks, right? And a nice big compressor. And you think, oh my God, what have I done? You haven't done anything. The compressor's looking after itself, all right? Okay, so it just relieves that pressure. Okay, so that takes us to that. Then we fill in the shutdown log, right? So open valves, wait for all stages to depressurize, bang, and stop the compressor, stop the prime mover. Never stop a compressor under load, except in an emergency, right? So we want to stop the compressor nicely depressurized, okay? You don't lock them. Some people say leave the pressure locked in there. No, you don't. Close all the drain valves. As I said, you don't want air being sucked in, because that air is going to have moisture in it. Close all valves. Dispose of condensate. Well, normally you've blown it all over the concrete anyhow, so there's no disposal. It's already done. But some have larger compressor sets have an auto set that will actually keep draining the separators on a regular basis, and they normally drain into a big bucket, right? So that bit there is applicable, right? Dispose of condensate, water, oil emulsion in a hazardous waste down the drain. No, I didn't say that, right? Fill in the compressor log, running hours and actions taken if you've done anything that's not normal. And then that, you know, an example of is in the student's notes, right? I can send you an example of that anyhow. And there's your compressor log, okay? So you put the hours run, the date that you're using it, the start time, the stop time, the hours run, the minutes run, the total time is added up. So you're looking at the compressor total time, all right? How many cylinders you filled, right? And the pressures that you started and stopped. Some people actually put temperatures in there as well. They take the temperature of the air, right? Because that has a bearing on how long it's going to take you to fill that cylinder. But normally that's all the sort of information you want. And then that's enough for you to show anybody, to show that you are actually running the compressor in a correct way. Running time, all right, here it goes. Filter life, filter run time, 30 hours maximum. You know, I said, 10 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours minute. That's the manufacturer will tell you just how long that'll last. But 30 hours on a compressor is a long time, you know, because you may be only running that compressor for an hour a week or an hour and a half a week. So, you know, 30, that's about 6 months, or could be. Depends how many times you charge the cylinders. And local information. I don't know what local actions, names, etc. You might have a bit there that says who actually operated the compressor. But if it's your own compressor, you wouldn't care about that anyhow. Okay. Right. Filter changed, right? And the little bit up there that says how many air. See, some of them have an air bank as well. We haven't got, you know, if it's a small compressor, you probably won't have an air bank. All you'll have is a cylinder. So now, this is very quickly now, I'm not going to be dwelling on this too long, right? The last place I was at, which was in Oman, we had a whole load of really good stuff, right? And we had 2 compressors, one that ran all the time automatically and charged a big bank of bottles, so that when we went in there, we just put our cylinders in the bath, connected them all up, and then filled them up from the bank. So the bank was kept full up by the compressor, even when nobody was diving. All right. So when you're filling from a bank, depends how many banks and how you do it, right? But so when you're filling from the bank, you would then have a flow control valve, and then gauges, and then a whip for each of the cylinders that you can fill. We had 7 whips, no, 8 whips, right? So we could fill eight cylinders at a time. Fantastic, it really was, right? And you connect them up, right? And then the main thing to remember is you find the highest dive cylinder pressure, and the filling rule is highest pressure cylinder, and you start with the lowest pressure bank, right? So that way you run the lowest pressure bank, and you get as much out the lowest pressure bank as you can on all the cylinders. And then you come to the next one and you work along, and then the next one and you work along. And then when you charge the cylinders up, they all come up together. All right. So that's it. So you look at the if you put them in there, you always start with the highest dive cylinder pressure, and you use the lowest bank pressure. And that way you can, what will happen is you will utilize your air more economically. Because when you finish filling, you've then got to fill all those banks back up again, ready for the next time you want to fill. But it's by far the easiest way to fill. And to finish, safety and maintenance. Compressed gas can be lethal. Do not let untrained operators use a compressor. Yeah, that's true. It can be very. Remember, you've got 200 bar in there, and I don't think if you've ever. I'll see if I can get hold of the video and send you the video. But they had a video of they deliberately laid a cylinder with 200 bar on it, and then hit the valve with a hammer and displaced the valve from the cylinder deliberately, and then they measured or they filmed the cylinder on its journey as it wrecked everything in front of it. It's like fucking, no, seriously, boys, it's like a rocket, and it is a very, very dangerous bit of kit, right? So be respectful of compressed gas cylinders. Don't throw them around, right? Because remember, if you damage that valve and that valve comes out, you've got 200, it's like a rocket engine. You've got 200 bar coming out, whoosh, and it will propel that. And if you're in front of it, you're not going to be alive. Sorry, it's as easy as that. So don't let people who don't understand use the compressor. Never use oil and grease on pipe work or shut off valves, right? Please don't. Use specially. You know, if you've got a problem and you don't understand that problem, get somebody in. Don't try doing it yourself. If you've got people who can do it, all well and good. But if you haven't got people who can do it, send it away or get somebody to come in and look at it. Stick to the procedures. Don't bypass. Use PPE like earmuffs, glasses, that sort of thing. Use it if it's required. And be aware of what they're saying on the labels, right? Compressed gas, corrosive gas. Or, sorry, compressed gas, that would be the oxygen, right? Which says this, you know, is combustible. And that's it. Any questions?
No, that's very comprehensive, Robin.
Huh?
It's very comprehensive. Cheers.
I'm just going to hang on just a minute. Get that. Oh. Right. Okay. So right, I'm going to, because actually I'm going to set that up and put it on the. Now, you said, are there any notes? I'll run through what I've just done myself, and then I'll put it on the YouTube. Right. And if you do need, I can always give you a copy of the one we've just been through. It doesn't matter. It's not the full course. And even if you looked at it and then went and did, if you wanted to do the operators course, you would still need to do the full course, right? You get the book and everything. Right. So was that okay? Did it cover all the stuff you wanted?
Yeah, it's good. It was good.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, Robin.
Right. It is a, you know, I am a compressor operator. Believe me, yes. Yeah. So no, it's something you know, I'd like to pass on, because if you get the opportunity, it's good to be a compressor operator, and you get the responsibility of looking after the quality of that gas, and you are responsible for the people that are using that gas, you know. So if it's like doing blending, if you did a blending course, you are responsible for the end product, right? Now, if they don't check the gas before they use it, that's their problem. But you don't let them take it away until they have actually checked it and signed it. Because when they've signed, let's say you do so let's say you gave me a cylinder and said, right, I want a 50% mix in there. I would mix you using the proper oh, I can't think of the name of it now. Yeah, I would mix it with oxygen first, then top it up with air, and I'd give you a mix, right? Okay, so I'd say, right, there's your 50% mix, and I would have tested that mix to make sure it's within the specification. And for nitrox 50, it would have to be within 0.5% of 50. So you could accept, or is it 1%? No, it's 0.5%, I think. So you could accept 0.5 over or 0.5 below, but nothing more. Now, once you tested it and you've approved the test, even if I carried out the test with you looking at it, right, and you approve it, you will sign to say you accept that. Partial pressure was what I was fighting for.
Yeah.
I would do partial pressure blending. Right, so I'd get the cylinder and then I'd work out how much oxygen needed to be in there and how much air I would need to top that up with to get you a 50%. So I'd do all the calculation that was necessary. I'd start by putting the oxygen in. And the reason I put the oxygen in first is because oxygen, you know, you might get a cylinder of oxygen at 150 bar, right? Now you do a 50% mix, you need 76% of oxygen in as O2 in that mix before you add the air. Then when you add the air and bring it up to 205 or 207 bar, you should have a 50% mix, right? But to get 76 pressure into that cylinder, if you were to do it the other way round and you put the air in first, then you'd have to find oxygen that was up in the 200 bar. And you know, oxygen costs money. You know, it's not terribly expensive, but it's still, you know, it only comes, not many people have oxygen compressors. So you get the oxygen in a J and you use it as many times as you possibly can. So you want to put the oxygen in first. So you put that in first, followed by the air, right? So that means you're putting 100% oxygen into a cylinder with nothing else in there. Not, you know, so you've got to be very, very sure that that cylinder is clean and there's no oil and muck kicking around in there. So that's how I would do it. And then I would test it. Then I would hand that test over to you and say, right, there's your cylinder. Once you've accepted it, you will sign it off, take it out, and my responsibility is done. But if you don't sign for it, my responsibility is still there. So, you know, I'm going to make sure I do it right. But that's blending, you know. And you can do blending with helium and all sorts of things. It just comes a little bit more tricky and there's more calculations to be done. But nonetheless, you know, any one of you could do it. You know, once you've been trained. There's only one thing you worry about, and I didn't say, when you are filling a cylinder from a bank, right, not from a compressor, from a bank, the filling rate is maximum 40 bar per minute. Okay, 40 bar, no more. Right? When you're doing oxygen, if you're doing a nitrox mix and you've got oxygen already in there, you come down to 20 bar a minute. And the reason for that is the heat. Right?
Yeah.
Right? Because you know, it would just, you get too bloody hot. Because once you've filled that cylinder, right, you get, right, there's 200 bar in there, take it away. And then you go put it on your back and you jump in the water and you find out, shit, I've only got 180. He hasn't seen you off. It's just the cylinder's cooled. And one of the gas laws says, if the temperature goes down, right, pressure goes down. Charles's law, I think it is. Okay, that's what I mean. Those three laws all have a bit to play in gas compression. Right, gents. Well, thank you very much for your time. And as I say, I hope you got a lot out of it. I said I hope you did. It's a bit longer, but I don't think you can do these sort of courses where, you know, you can't put it down to an hour. It's difficult, very difficult. Okay, then.
I enjoyed it. Cheers, Robin. Yeah, thanks, Robin.
You're more
Thank you very much, Robin.
It's lovely to see you all. Just take care. We'll all be back together again one day. Okay.
I don't believe you.
As soon as I put it on, John, I'll let you know that I put the thing on the thingy, and then for the three of you, I'll send you a copy of the presentation I've used.
That's magic.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Good night,
Cheers,
boys.
Cheers, guys. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.